Everyone out there, Dan here from Geekcast Radio, doing another graphic thoughts video. This is where I go through some of the recent graphic novels I've been reading, give you my thoughts and opinions on them, let you know if they're books maybe you should check out, or what I overall got out of them as I read through them. And I try to do a variety of different books when I read this, things that cover different genres, different companies, all that, just kind of show the variety that there is in comics. And this week is no different. These books are really not connected in any way whatsoever. Everything from video games to true life stories to upcoming comic books from creators who are now huge in today's world. So I'm starting with actually a different book in the sense of it's a Halo graphic novel based, of course, of the video game. And I played Halo a lot growing up. The first Xbox version of it, the first two games. I haven't played many of the ones after that. So I think there's like 4 or 5. I think the last Halo game I played was Halo Reach. And I enjoyed them. The stories were fine. I read some of the comics that came out through Marvel at the beginning, which were okay. And I thought, I got picked up the library. I give it a read through. With that, I don't know how much this is connected to the actual lore of the video games. I know there's some other novels or anything like that. So I don't know if this is like a self-contained story that doesn't impact the actual game or is filling in things for the video games. But it's called Rise of Atriox. I believe that's how you say his name. I don't know. But it ended up being a much better than I anticipated. So it starts off, and I was thinking it's like, okay, we're gonna follow these human soldiers, but doesn't have Master Chief, which is really the only character I truly remember as they're getting destroyed by the Covenant. Is really the first piece of it, but really it ends up following the guy on the cover, Atriox, who becomes almost like a splinter group off of the Covenant, which are like the empire of the Halo world, and he becomes this almost rebellious force that is in between the soldiers of not the American soldiers, but the human soldiers and the Earthlings and the other Covenant, and becomes like this infighting civil war type of situation where like his race is fighting against the actual Covenant because he's considered a blasphemer because he doesn't believe in the religious aspect that they're trying to use these people. They've basically been taking a lot of the underling soldiers and just throwing them at war, having them die over and over again, but there's so many forces that they didn't really care. So this guy comes along and kind of says, you know what, I don't want to do that. I want to I don't believe them anymore. I don't believe their prophecy. I'm going to go forth. And, it's, again, it's not rewriting the book. The art changes almost every issue within this, and some of it works more than others. I think by the end of it, I felt the art got much different, like this version of it, and it didn't flow all that great. But I think if you're a Halo fan, if you enjoy that world, I think you'll like it. It has a lot of it really expands that universe in an interesting way. I do like it when you kind of see it through the other side, the forces of the other side. It makes it feel a little bit more complete, that there are all these different, fractions going in. So it was a lot of fun, enjoyable, cool science fiction adventure, put up by Dark Horse. And Dark Horse has been doing a lot of good stuff with their licensed properties, much better than just like throwing whatever out there because they know it's going to make money. That's actually was quite good. And this is kind of the backwards licensed property. This is Babylon Berlin. And this is actually a European comic that was translated through Titan. And Titans actually has this true crime line that they've been doing, taking a lot of like pulpy stories and printing them or reprinting them or continuing them. And this reminds me a lot of like the movie Third Man. It takes place in Berlin, as the title indicates, in between World War I and World War II. Nazis are kind of in the peripheral. They're not really taking over. There's like no Nazi insignia or anything like that. But you can see this is a Germany that is kind of more recovered than it was during World War I. But it follows this cop who was just recently transferred to Berlin, and a murder occurs that he kind of knows things about. He was kind of placed there because of bad things that happened, and it has every pretty much trope you could possibly imagine when it comes to a noir story of this nature. A cop with a troubled past, he kind of can't get out of his own way, and as a person who loves that type of stuff, I thought it was quite good and enjoyable. I don't know necessarily though. I love the art that was it's all black and white, and the landscapes I thought were pretty great. Even the setting, because it's not necessarily a setting that is super familiar for me. So this in 1930s Germany, where the big conflict within this is there's a lot of Russians within Berlin, and the communist is on the rise there. So you have the police officers trying to kind of stop that and doing it by force. There's a lot of conflict going on, and then there's a lot of pieces like this, as often is the case with noir stories. That can get convoluted. A lot of characters, a lot of things happening. But if you do like those types of stories, if you like your Humphrey Bogarts, your Maltese Falcons, all that, that is very much this. It has that atmosphere. It has everything that you would kind of want within that. Even the styling and clothing. I thought it was quite enjoyable read, and I think having it overextended, the bigger size works because we have a lot of these it really kind of makes Berlin, as cliche as it is, very much a character within this. So, but like I said, my biggest takeaway from this is that I don't necessarily think it transcends the genre that it's in or does anything outside of the norm all that much that we haven't necessarily seen before. So it does hit those cliches. It hits it well. It's like a recipe that you know and are well aware of and you might enjoy. But if you're looking for something that goes a little bit extra, it doesn't necessarily do that. Sorry, I lost my next book. Next book's a little bit different, very different actually. This is one that came out this year, and this is A Dead Eye in the Deep Blue Sea. This is a phenomenal book, in my opinion. I can definitely see this being up for Eisner's next year, and especially in the true story I forget the exact name of it, but the nonfiction category. And what this story is, it's actually the author in the back. It's his tale of his life of being kind of placed into slavery, modern day slavery in Thailand, and it's a very eye-awakening situation that's happening. That really is not talked about all that much, and just the matter-of-fact way that he gets placed into this. And what's really, I think, there's some really good opening introductions and forwards in this that talks about where this comes from, and how this a lot of this, the meaning of this book is coming back from previous paintings and other depictions of slavery that all they knew about it were the images that were kind of made because people didn't know how to read and write, but they could draw. And that talks about it. This person's story. He was never schooled. He didn't go to any art school, or he barely, I think, knew how to read and write. But he had artistic ability, and he learned how to draw simply by drawing in the mud and in the dirt. That's where he kind of honed his skills, and then later on, actually learned doing it through tattooing. And that's kind of where he learned. And all the art is done by him. It's almost like a prose book because it's all dialogue with written underneath. And I would say one thing that maybe is a downtrodden to this because of how it's designed, it being translated through other parties, is that it does come off as very clinical in the sense of there's not a lot of emotion in the words. It's very matter of fact of this is what happened, that's what happened, this is what happens next. But I think where the emotion comes in, as you kind of see, it's him learning how to draw there. Where the emotion comes in certainly is within the art. And I think what this kind of made me realize is maybe why I like comics so much, because they connect the most primal art form, which is obviously drawing. It's the first art form that we ever had is cave drawings helped us look into what life was like for people during that time before there were anything of written history, and then the written word, which forever changed the way we are as a culture. Allowed us to write our own history, allowed us to create language on an entirely different level. And then when you kind of connect those two, there's just something special about it. So this kind of goes through his life, and bit by bit, like how he basically started off as a normal guy. He ends up getting married, and very poor, and he realizes that once they get married and are about to have a kid, that they don't have enough money to support themselves. We need to go out and find a job. And he basically just gets trapped into this situation where he becomes a slave. It's very dangerous in the way, or just simple in how it happens. He takes a trip over to this land where he thinks he's getting work, but he doesn't have any money to pay for the actual voyage itself. They say, oh, don't worry about it, you'll pay us when you get your work and you'll get his money back. But then once he gets there, there's no actual work, and they're saying, well, he's like, okay, I'll go back, but you can't go back because you can't pay the person that you owe, so you're supposed to work off that debt. And then just next thing he knows, he's in an entirely different country. They're getting sneaked across the border. And what's interesting too, it's not like they're being held up by, through guns or anything like that at first. It's just, it's just threat really of what's happening. It's happening so quickly that I don't think they realize what's occurring. At one point, they actually are like stuck in a hotel room, and they think about leaving, but they're like, where would we go? We're in a new country. They're threatened, saying, well, if this other army finds you, they're probably going to kill you because you're here illegally. So they're just stuck through fear. And eventually, he lands in a fishing boat, and it just goes through like the harshness of that life, how like the dangers that he had to face. And it's an arduous journey throughout this, obviously, as you would expect. But like I said, it's very eye-awakening. And I think it may sound like homework or saying like, why would this sounds like a horrific story? Do I really want to experience it myself? And I think it's definitely worth experiencing because it kind of just shows you. And this seems like it would have happened 300 years ago, 400 years ago, or 100 years ago during the 1800s. But it's happening right now, and it's still happening. So I think it's very important, and like especially the imagery just gives you so much of what's happening, and it was remarkable. Trying to make sure I don't show it's very. It was kind of, I was waiting for that Spielberg-esque moment, or that moment where everything kind of comes together, because we know obviously this being written by him that everything works out in the end, but it doesn't really highlight that all that much. It's just in the afterwards and in the matter-of-factness of it, and the challenge of him. He was gone for 5-6 years and coming back home, and no one knew what happened to him. There was no communication. They just probably thought he often left because he was scared. And it's just like it's a tragedy of all tragedies, but I think it's really worth it because just through the art alone, just hearing the story and just seeing see someone tell their tale, I definitely advise picking it up. So, and again, I got all these at the library. A very different story, but I thought I'd leave on a more fun note than horror in real life. This is horror in more of a comic sense of the word, and this is the Ghost Fleet by Donny Cates, and this was talking about that an up and coming writer who's now huge. This is really one of the first big stories by Donny Cates, and I've never read it before, so I wanted to give the first volume a try to see was there something there that let us know that he'd be the hottest thing in comics in 2018, and there is a lot of what Donny Cates does now here. It's very big, bold, over the top. It's about the Ghost Fleet as this idea of this group of individuals that are in the United States that travel and bring goods throughout the U.S. that are often illegal or shouldn't be known, and they try to do it under the cover of the night, or basically really good smugglers. But it expands from that, and in today's day and age, it started during the Civil War. Now today, using things like gigantic trucks, but it's not necessarily just, hey, they're drugs or money or people. It ends up being a little bit more, have more of a fantasy science fiction element to it, as you would expect, and things go really badly. And as this is also drawn by Danny Warren Johnson, who's also becoming, I think, more and more of a mainstream artist as well, and it has that big and bold, over-the-top aspect that you would expect for Donny Cates, but there's a little bit more characterization in here. There is this big split up between two of the main characters who are friends, and then we deal with their fallout because they perhaps betray one another, and there's this secret kind of cabal in the background that's kind of pulling the strings of different things, where what they're smuggling has a danger aspect to it, like that may be more world-ending than they even realize. So looking at something like Venom, you could see where that is taking place, where Venom has, it's this street level character sometimes where he's expanding it to this cosmic level event, and that's the case here, where you have, basically tractor trailers, road rage type of, almost like Drive, something of that nature, and you expanding it to this, calamitous, huge, world-ending, apocalyptic type of story, and balancing those two. And this is only the first volume, but I can definitely see why people pick this up, and then Donny Cates began to grow a huge audience, and why that's kind of stuck with him through this. And I think God Country is, to me, still his best thing that I've read so far. This is fun and this is good, but it's a little. There's a lot of stuff in here that I feel like in the first volume that is happening in the background we're not aware of, especially the relationship between the main two characters. There's a lot of things that have happened, and by the end of the first volume, we still don't really have a full understanding of the relationship, and I think that's the one area where I feel Donny Cates struggles sometimes, is knowing when to give you information, when to not, on a character standpoint, where we can tell there are things that are happening here, but there's the lack of context sometimes limits that impact in that moment. And by the end of this, it's probably filled in, but it's that struggle of when do you provide information, when do you hold off, and when you're going for a character moment where that's bringing these two people together and kind of showing them off and providing some more of a conflict, but you don't have the full context. That's where I think it doesn't have the impact that it's designed to. But other than that, it's a really fun, over the top experience. If you liked everything he's been doing for Venom, his Thanos story, I don't see why you would not enjoy this. I will be picking up the second volume, but I had a little nitpicks, but overall it was hard. It was hardcore in the best of ways. So and again, really original, and that's one thing about Donny Cates I will say, is that he does not rest on his laurels at all, even with his own comics. So, alrighty, well that's it for me for this week in my graphic thoughts. Let me know what you think. Any comics that you're currently reading, any things that I talked about that you've read and you have your own personal opinions on. Let me know in the comments below. But just remember, comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one. Until next time, thanks for watching.